We need to block grant back discretionary domestic spending to the states and the local communities. It's called federalism, it's called the 10th Amendment, but it's the principle, returning power and money wherever possible to the states, local communities, or keeping it with the people themselves. Specifically, we did that with welfare reform. We need to do that today with Medicaid, which is going to bankrupt many of the states. I don't care whether it's a Republican governor or a Democratic governor. Anybody looking at Medicaid knows it's financially unsustainable. Block grant it back to the states as we did with welfare reform. Do the same with education. We tried to move power and money back to education in the first Reagan term. Unfortunately, we were blocked in Congress. I think this is a time when people are open to decentralization. I mean, even in the George W. Bush administration, I got a chapter called Big Government Conservatism is an Oxymoron. I mean, I worked for Barry Goldwater. We used to call that a watered-down version of big government liberalism when we were fighting with Rockefeller back in the early 60s. But the reality is, Department of Education with the Bush-Kennedy No Child Left Behind legislation doubled spending over education in the 8 years they were in office, increased the mandates, and guess what? The Obama administration has taken that and run with it and made it even worse. The key is to come up with an alternative, and what you need to do is basically send the power and the money, keep a small research arm at the Department of Education, but the power and the money back to the states, the local communities, get the mandates off, the earmarks off, and all of a sudden you can make significant cuts, and at the same time get rid of all of the sort of the pass-through or everybody having to go to Washington hat in hand trying to get some of our money back, or make sure another unfunded mandate isn't passed. That's the direction we need to go, and I really believe the American people are open to this idea. In fact, E.F. Schumacher wrote a book called Small is Beautiful, and he challenged the notion that bigger is better and called for decentralization when economic, political, and social structures become too large and complex. Sounds like our federal government. Schumacher bluntly stated, quote, "Any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex, and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction." And the time is right to move in that direction. And again, just like the idea of growing our private sector, I think this is a way to win back the Reagan Democrats and independence that we lost in the post-Reagan period. Business and labor ought to support a policy to grow the private sector. And let me tell you, I see it even in our state, educators who are not necessarily conservative, not even Republican necessarily, but they're so frustrated by the power of the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., and I think they're open to ideas like this, but we have to lay it out and lay out a good plan as to how to, in a way, do more with less. Finally, there are two issues I want to address briefly and then leave time for questions.